Ichiru was a lonely, broke manga artist who gooned to 2D girls, just like you. However, his life changes when he hires an assistant to help him, but she turns out to be an alien princess who wants to marry and crack him.
Yeah, boy.
It all began after Ichiro's father died, and he became the sole guardian of his siblings, Machi and Fumio. They got by on the rent from the apartment complex he inherited, as well as his earnings from his manga. But since he wasn't Ichiro Oda, he wasn't making enough sales. Still, he was determined to try harder so his sister wouldn't end up streaming on OnlyFans. The only problem was that his assistant had just quit, and with his most recent deadline approaching, he didn't know what to do. Before he could spiral into despair, his editor called and informed him that he had found him a new manga assistant. Unable to contain his excitement, Ichiru ran out of the house to go pick her up because she was new to the area. When he arrived at the meeting point, he was so stunned by her beauty that he froze like an old computer trying to install San Andreas. Eventually, he regained his senses, and the girl introduced herself as Shiori. Ichiru then asked her to address him by his real name, and not his pen name, since they would be working together. When they returned to his place later, he explained her duties and suggested she change her clothes, since they looked expensive and he didn't want them to get dirty. Shiori said she always dressed like that and that she didn't mind the dirt, but Ichiro still felt uncomfortable. So to ease his conscience, he found an old hoodie and asked her to put it on instead. He then put her to work and was impressed by how well and fast she did her work. When he asked how long she'd been a manga assistant, Shiori told him that he was her first employer and even showed him the book she'd used to learn, which impressed Ichiro. Hours later, it was nighttime, so Ichiro suggested that Shiori go to sleep in the spare room, but Shiori refused. She then started talking to avoid falling asleep and told him she had started reading manga after finding her grandmother's collection. Ichiro's manga was one of them, and as soon as she read it, she became hooked because the story was peak. Ichiru swelled with pride at her compliment but played the humble card, asking her to continue supporting him. That night, they were forced to work all night to meet the manga deadline. Shiori passed out as soon as they finished, while Ichiro managed to package the manuscript before he followed her to Slumberland. About an hour later, Ichiro woke up, and when he looked at Shiori, he noticed something sticking out of her back. Worried that a pen had stabbed her, he tried to pull it out but got pricked and found himself floating in space. Suddenly, an angry Shiori yanked him back to reality and scolded him for touching her without permission. Ichiro quickly explained what had happened, which calmed her, but then she told him that his actions had caused a problem. This confused him, so she revealed that she was the princess of a race called the Star People, and that what he touched was called a stinger. According to her people's customs, she had to marry whoever was linked with her stinger, and Ichiro had just done that by touching it. When she told him that she had left home looking for true love, Ichiro told her that a bottom-tier loser like him wasn't a good fit. Shiori said she was aware, however, he was the only available option. Feeling a bit inadequate, Ichiro suggested that they talk about the issue later. Shiori agreed and told him that she was going to catch some Z's. While she slept, Ichiro's editor came over to collect the manuscript. On his suggestion that Ichiro draw some colored pages for his next issue, Ichiro couldn't contain his excitement. Later, when Shiori woke up, she informed Chihiro, Machi, and Fumio that she was going to pop back home for a while. Hours after she left, Machi found Ichiro passed out from a fever, after Chihiro helped lay him on his futon. Machi said Ichiro was that way because he hadn't rested properly. Just then, his phone pinged with a message from Shiori about her pay. Fumio sent a reply on Ichiro's behalf, informing Shiori that he was sick. Machi scolded the young boy for messing with their brother's phone, but he ignored her and jumped on Ichiro. When Ichiro asked him to get off so he wouldn't get sick too, Machi joined the dog pile and told Ichiro that they didn't mind catching his bug. Ichiro had to beg Chihiro to take them away so he could relax. Unfortunately, he couldn't do that, and as he began cursing his bad luck, Shiori walked in. She told him that his fever had occurred because she had left and explained that it was one of the effects of their link. When she began apologizing, he told her that she wasn't to blame, so she offered to lie beside him. Once she got comfortable, Bro became flustered as it was his first time being that close to a girl. When things started getting awkward, Shiori started making small talk about his job and their relationship. Suddenly, she noticed his sketchbook lying on the floor, so she picked it up. Ichiro told her it was for his colored sketches, and she immediately became intrigued, as it had been a year since he'd done a colored manga. When she began flipping through it, he asked which one she liked best, so she flipped the book around and showed it to him. Ichiro then took the book back and said he'd expand on the pattern, but he suddenly felt lightheaded thanks to his fever. Shiori asked him not to overexert himself, but he was determined to keep working, so he asked what he could do to speed up his healing process. Shiori said physical contact would help, so she held his hand, and a few seconds later, he felt better and fell asleep. When he woke up later, he went looking for Shiori and found her looking at the room for rent sign. She asked if she could take the room, and he told her it was all hers. A little while later, she returned with her things, and after settling in, she went outside to meet Ichiro. Since he was weeding the yard, Shiori joined him and told him that she'd asked her people to find out if their pact could be annulled. When they finished the task at hand, Shiori asked Ichiro to go shopping with her, and he agreed. Shortly after they arrived, Shiori tried on some dresses, but Ichiro told her that they all made her look like a strict Brigidan governess. This prompted her to try on an outfit with more color, only to end up looking like a schoolgirl. However, Ichiro encouraged her to buy the outfit because he saw how much she liked it. Afterwards, they went to the bookstore, and Shiori stared at the manga section as if she'd walked into a room full of gold. Once she finished that, they went to a nearby cafe and ordered some desserts. When Ichiro noticed that Shiori was mumbling something to herself, he asked if she was praying, and she said she was trying to communicate with her people. Ichiro was surprised to learn that she could use telepathy, and she told him that her people were just built differently. She then took a bite of her dessert and declared that her taste buds were having a party. Just then, Ichiro remembered something and pulled up a tourist site for her island and started reading from the legend page. According to the story, a shooting star had landed on the island many years ago and started crying because it felt lonely. A young girl had found the star, and when its tears touched her, she connected with it and understood its sadness. So she promised to tell everyone about it and also shared her tears with all her friends. Eventually, everyone connected with the star, but the more it cried, the smaller it became until it finally disappeared. However, its feelings remained with the people. After reading the story, Ichiro asked Shiori if it was true, and she told him it was. The only difference was that it was a meteorite, not a star, that fell, and what the people took from it was a microorganism. Her words prompted Ichiro to say it was a venom situation, and Shiori revealed that her grandmother was the first star offspring. She didn't know the true story until she started hanging out with her grandmother a year ago and reading books from her library. Each story was so unique that Shiori decided she wanted to live like a manga protagonist. Unfortunately, her grandma died, but before she did, she convinced her daughter to let Shiori leave the island. Ichiro sympathized with Shiori but said he was glad that she got to kickstart her dream. Shiori told him she still had to break their engagement first, and Ichiro promised to help her bag a new guy afterwards, which annoyed her. Suddenly, he sneezed and excused himself to go to the bathroom. When he got back, he found two guys talking to Shiori and immediately tried to pull her out of the cafe. Unfortunately, his grip was so strong that he unintentionally hurt Shiori and then ended up with a nosebleed. They then left the cafe and went to a shrine, where Shiori revealed that she caused his unexpected sneeze and nosebleed. Apparently, if he got forceful with her or she got upset, their bond would punish him for it. Shiori apologized for hurting him and said she wished she had never left her island, but Ichiro told her not to say such things. He explained that if she hadn't left the island, she never would have gotten the chance to start chasing her dreams. When he said this, he remembered when he first started drawing manga and became emotional. However, he didn't realize it until Shiori wiped his tears away. He then told her he wanted to get to know her better so their engagement would go smoothly. Days later, Shiori spent the entire night reading a manga called Master of the Lion's Fist. So in the morning, the first thing she did was tell Ichiro all about it like a true otaku. When she finally finished geeking out over the manga, Ichiro suggested that they experiment on their bond. He wanted to see how far apart they could be without him being punished with an ailment. Shiori agreed, and after a brief deliberation, it was decided that she would go to the train station. After she left, Ichiro returned to work, and nothing happened. However, once Shiori got on the train and got squeezed in with the other passengers like a can of sardines, Ichiro felt his body react. He immediately called her to find out how far she'd gone, and Shiori apologized, saying that the packed train made her uncomfortable. After she got back, she apologized to Ichiro, but he assured her it was fine since they had confirmed he wouldn't be punished if they were a station apart. He then suggested that they test what happened when they made sudden physical contact. Shiori quickly flipped through one of her Master of Lion Fist volumes and showed Ichiro a panel where the protagonist was getting beaten up. As a man of peace, Ichiro suggested that she switch genres, so Shiori pulled out one of her shoujo manga. This time, she showed him a panel where the protagonist snuck up on the female lead and covered her eyes. Ichiro didn't think anything would happen, but Shiori looked so expectant that he couldn't refuse her. When she turned around and he caught a glimpse of her exposed neck, he started freaking out like the virgin loser that he was. Nevertheless, he pushed himself to complete the task and was surprised by how small her head was. When he pulled away, Shiori showed him the next panel, which was a very intimate position. As expected, Ichiro panicked, but Shiori insisted that he go through with it and even say the protagonist's line. Ichiro had no choice but to play along, but instead of sounding and acting seductively, he ended up sounding and looking like a creep. Shiori couldn't help but laugh, causing Bro's pride to take a nosedive into the shame pit. For the next test, Shiori wanted him to recreate the famous wall trap scene, and Ichiro immediately panicked. He tried to convince her to pick something else, but Shiori's heart was set on that scene, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. Ichiro had to lock up his nerves and go through with it, But the moment his palm connected with the wall, his siblings walked in, shocking them into silence. Machi quickly covered Fumeo's eyes and scolded Ichiro for trying to get freaky with them, still in the house. Ichiro tried to explain the situation, but kept stuttering like an idiot, so Shiori stepped in. She assured Machi that they were conducting an experiment, but the young girl remained unconvinced. Despite that, she left with Fumeo, and Ichiro asked Shiori if they could get back to work because he was beyond embarrassed. He promised they would continue their experiment another time, since he wasn't punished for doing any of the things he did. He also encouraged Shiori to write down the things she wanted to try, and she promised to do just that. Shortly after she left, Ichiro's editor called to inform him that his manga had been well received. However, the fans wanted more cringeworthy, lovey-dovey scenes instead of the fight scenes he was filling the manga with. In other words, he had to rewrite his plot, and Ichiro had no idea where to begin. In fact, he was so overwhelmed that he started cleaning just to avoid doing his work. When his siblings walked in, Machi clocked what was happening right away and tried to cheer him up by asking him to play with Fumeo's cheeks. Unfortunately, their younger brother's cuteness wasn't enough to snap Ichiro back to his senses, and that worried her. The next day, Ichiro was still suffering from a creative block. When Machi and Shiori came to check on him, he didn't notice them, so Machi asked Shiori to help Ichiro. Before Shiori could decide, the doorbell rang, and a dark-haired woman walked in. Machi excitedly welcomed her, addressing her as Moka-ni, but the woman introduced herself to Shiori as Momoka, a former tenant of the apartment. After they moved to the kitchen to slice up the pie she brought, Ichiro walked in, and he was also happy to see Momoka. As they ate the pie, Machi revealed that Momoka and Ichiro grew up together. However, Momoka had married Ichiro's editor. Ichiro added that Momoka, the author of Master of Lion's Fist and Shiori, couldn't contain her joy. She asked Momoka for an autograph, and Momoka promised to give her one. Eventually, the conversation shifted to Shiori's talent, and after Ichiro hyped her up, she asked Momoka if she needed an assistant. Momoka told her she didn't need one at the moment, but said she had no problem with her working as a guest. She then asked whether Shiori was experienced with digital work, and Shiori admitted she wasn't. Momoka told her that she'd have to learn because all her work was done digitally and offered to give Shiori her old tablet. Shiori was very grateful for her offer, and Ichiro also thanked Momoka for helping. This prompted Momoka to talk about the past, when Ichiro used to be her assistant, and Shiori was surprised, even more so when Machi revealed that Momoka had taught Ichiro everything about manga. A little while later, Momoka left, and while Ichiro was trying to work on his manuscript, he was hit by a wave of sharp pain. He quickly realized that something was wrong with Shiori, so he went looking for her, and they went outside to talk. Shiori admitted that she felt weird seeing him interact with Momoka the way he did. Ichiro reminded her that he had grown up with Momoka and that the woman was already married, but Shiori said she couldn't help how she felt. Suddenly, it dawned on her that what she was feeling was jealousy, so without thinking, she blurted out that she loved Ichiro. The shocked guy tried to respond, but Shiori cut him off, saying she wanted to enjoy the feeling before he rejected her. She then rushed off, leaving him alone and flustered. The next day, when Ichiro woke up, his siblings came to ask if he could take them to the zoo, and he agreed. Unfortunately, when it was time to leave, it started raining heavily, so Machi and Fumeo sadly walked back to their room. Left with nothing to do, Ichiro returned to his room and tried to redo his manga plot. Try being the key word, as he still couldn't come up with anything and kept thinking of Shiori like a love-sick simp. Meanwhile, Shiori was in her room trying to practice her drawing, but because her mind was occupied with thoughts of Ichiro, she kept drawing him. She also thought back to the time they spent together and started cringing hard because she couldn't believe she'd done and said most of the things she recalled. Later in the day, Ichiro left his room to get more coffee, only to run into Shiori in the hallway, spying on Machi and Fumeo. Ichiro explained what happened, so she offered to hang out with them, since her plans to go to the library were also cancelled due to the rain. Ichiro confirmed that doing that would boost his siblings' mood, so he promised to join them once he finished working. After he returned to his room, he slumped against the door, as he hadn't expected Shiori to act like nothing had happened the night before. Outside the door, Shiori was in a similar predicament because she hadn't planned to act that way either. However, she pushed the thought aside, and she walked into the kitchen area to speak to Machi and Fumeo. When she noticed that Machi had a deck of cards in her hands, she asked what they were for. Machi told her that they were fortune-telling cards Ichiro had made for her, so Shiori asked if she could have her fortune read. Sometime later that day, Ichiro completed his plot rewrite and went to grace the others with his presence. However, he was shocked to find them looking all gloomy. Shiori explained that she had accidentally ripped one of Machi's cards, but Machi insisted that it wasn't her fault. Ichiro knew she was only saying that to make Shiori feel better, so he offered to make a new deck for her. Machi immediately refused, stating that he'd need to draw inspiration from a fortune-telling book, which they didn't have. Seeing how bummed out she was, Shiyuri asked Machi who her favorite fortune teller was, and Machi told her it was someone named Fruit Migahara-sensei. After hearing this, Shiyuri said she would go to the library and borrow a fortune-telling book written by that person. Machi told her she didn't have to, but Shiyuri assured her she didn't mind, since she was supposed to go to the library anyway. After she left, Machi asked Ichiro why Shiyori was going out of her way to help, and Ichiro said it was because Shiyori was secretly the fairy godmother. His response seemed to cheer Machi up, so she told Fumio to go with her to grab some paper. Time soon passed, and Ichiro sat looking out the window and wondering why Shiyori wasn't back yet. Tired of seeing him act like a dog missing its owner, Machi suggested that Ichiro go looking for Shiyori. Ichiro didn't even think twice before he ran out of the house. However, he had only gone a few blocks when he ran into Shiyori returning home. She was surprised to see him, but he was more concerned with her well-being, and it was only after he confirmed that she was fine that he relaxed. Shiyori told him that she'd gotten the books they needed to make the cards and handed him the bag to carry. Ichiro then asked if she'd also gotten the books she wanted, and Shiyori went quiet. She'd been so carried away with cheering Machi up that she'd completely forgotten about herself. Ichiro couldn't help but laugh at this, but he didn't make Shiyori feel stupid or anything. When they got back home, Machi flipped through the book and found a design that she liked, so Ichiro started drawing it immediately. Machi and Fumio were so excited that they kept their eyes glued to Ichiro while he drew. Ichiro told them that their stares were making him nervous, but they replied that they loved watching him draw, so he dropped the topic. Shiyori, who was standing nearby, pointed out that Ichiro's drawing was coming out nicely. Ichiro thanked her for the compliment and then asked her to help him draw the card borders. Machi handed her the papers excitedly, so Shiyori sat down and got to work. A little while later, the cards were ready, and Machi was so happy that she offered to read Ichiro's fortune. Just then, Shiyori walked in with a clothes rack, which she set up in the corner and covered with a black cloth. She said Machi could pretend that the space was her fortune-telling tent, and to help her immerse herself in the role, she dressed her up like a fortune teller. They also put a planetarium globe on the table for aesthetic purposes, and praised Machi for looking the part. Machi was so shy that she tried to act all nonchalant and even declared that when she got older, she would get a steady job. Shocked, Ichiro asked Machi why she wanted to change her career path. Machi told him that she knew he was working hard to send them to school, so she didn't want to disappoint him. Ichiro assured her that he wouldn't be disappointed because, just like every shonen protagonist, he was an advocate for chasing dreams. He also said that pursuing her dreams wouldn't keep her from attending school. So Machi cheered up and went to read Fumio's fortune for him. As Ichiro watched them, he thanked Shiyori for turning the gloomy day around, and she replied that she didn't do much. However, everything made her realize she had done the right thing by leaving her island. Ichiro then told her that he knew she would make a great manga artist someday. That night, Ichiro added a few finishing touches to his manuscript and then went to the kitchen to put up a sign on the makeshift fortune teller tent. Unable to resist, he turned on the planetarium and was admiring the view when Shiyori walked in. She asked if he needed help cleaning up, but he said no, as he wanted his siblings to do it themselves. Shiyori then sat across from him and tried to talk about her confession, but Ichiro cut her off. He admitted he was happy that she liked him. However, he wasn't ready for a relationship, let alone marriage. So he wanted their engagement to be annulled as soon as possible. Shiyori didn't say anything, but when she noticed that bruises were starting to appear on his neck, she tried to get him to stop talking. It seemed that rejecting her also came with a punishment, but Ichiro refused to shut up. He kept speaking his mind until he suddenly blurted out that he was also in love with her and wanted them to date. Shiyori instantly became flustered, and when she couldn't handle the rush of emotions anymore, she hit her face on the table. However, she raised her head to say yes to dating Ichiro before dramatically pretending to faint from happiness. The next day, the siblings woke up early and began getting ready to go to the zoo. When Shiyori walked into the kitchen and saw them, Machi invited her to tag along. And almost immediately, Shiyori and Ichiro panicked. They recalled what happened the night before and realized that the trip to the zoo would be their first official date. The thought of it excited Shiyori, so she immediately accepted the invitation. On the other hand, Ichiro started wondering how he'd tell his siblings that he was dating an alien princess. When they arrived at the zoo later, they took a group photo by the zoo layout. Then Ichiro sat down with his siblings and discussed how they intended to move around the zoo. Shiyori was impressed by how well prepared they were, and they told her it was because they didn't want to run into problems. Machi asked if she'd ever been to the zoo before, and Shiyori admitted that she hadn't. However, since she was an island princess, she was familiar with animals. Hearing this, Machi declared that it was time to kick off their zoo trip, and the others agreed. As they walked around the zoo, Shiyori took photos of all the animals, and Ichiro was glad that she was enjoying herself. Suddenly, Shiyori spotted a couple holding hands and immediately wanted to do the same with Ichiro. Unfortunately, his hands had been claimed by his siblings, making her feel sad. As she stood awkwardly to the side, Ichiro noticed her stealing glances at them and wondered if she was feeling like the unwanted fourth wheel. Soon, they moved to the petting zoo, where a staff member showed them how to handle the guinea pigs. Machi succeeded on her first try, but poor Fumio wasn't so lucky, as the guinea pigs avoided him like he had the plague. Seeing this, Shiyuri crouched down to his level and explained that animals could sense fear, so he had to relax if he wanted one to let him touch it. Taking Shiyuri's advice, Fumio successfully picked one of the guinea pigs. The one that was left looked mean, but Shiyuri easily tamed it and let it sleep in her lap. A little while later, they washed their hands, and just as Ichiro turned, he noticed a boy who looked lost. Hoping to help him, he approached the boy and started asking questions, but at that moment, the boy's father called out to him, and he ran off. Machi found it hilarious and told Ichiro that if she were the one he came up to like that, she would have screamed, "Stranger danger." Shiyuri told her not to be like that and said that if she were lost, Ichiro's kindness would make her happy. Machi only laughed harder at this, but when she noticed that Shiyuri was the same shade as a tomato, she became suspicious. Faced with his sister's questioning gaze, Ichiro started panicking until he blurted out that he was dating Shiyuri. His siblings didn't say anything, prompting him to imagine that they wouldn't approve. However, he was genuinely surprised when they cheered and congratulated him for bagging a first-class baddie as his first girlfriend. Overwhelmed, Ichiro promised to keep things vanilla around, and Shiyuri added that they wouldn't even hold hands. Machi assured the couple that she wouldn't mind them holding hands and then asked if they were getting in the way of their first date. Ichiro and Shiyuri immediately denied it, and Shiyuri even said she was the one intruding on their family time. The siblings were shocked by her statement, but Shiyuri wasn't finished. She crouched down and formally asked the younger siblings for their blessing. Machi told her that she didn't have to do that, but Fumio went to stand beside Ichiro and said she had his support. This prompted Ichiro to promise them that he would never neglect any of them. Machi told him she already knew that, then went to stand next to him so he'd stop feeling bad. Once she was satisfied, she told Fumio it was time for them to see the Dragon Warrior's extended family. However, as they ran, she suddenly stopped and asked Shiyuri what she liked about her loser brother. The unexpected question had Shiyuri fumbling for words, but Ichiro saved her when he suddenly called out to Machi and told her to stop bugging his girl. They then continued to the pandas, but Shiyuri couldn't help but wonder what it was that Ichiro liked about her. A few hours later, they went to the giraffe habitat to watch them eat, so Ichiro and Shiyuri took photos of the moment. Ichiro then approached Shiyuri and told her he was glad she'd spoken to his siblings, and she said she was happy his siblings had accepted their relationship. Saying it out loud made them blush so hard that steam came out of their heads. However, Ichiro quickly snapped out of it when Shiyori asked if they could hold hands. He told her he'd been thinking the same thing, so after a few awkward moments, they linked hands. Machi and Fumio were excited for them, but when they saw Shiyori crying, they became worried. Shiyori assured them that she was fine and explained that her tears were tears of joy, so they hugged her. Meanwhile, back on her island, her family wondered if she was doing okay. Her mom, Miyoka, was way too proud to admit she missed her daughter, but she told the staff to inform her when Shiyori finally got in touch. Back in the city, Ichiro and the others returned home, and after his siblings went to bed, he decided to get some work done. However, the blank page felt a little too daunting, so he opted to do the dishes instead. At the same time, Shiyori took a shower, and when she finished, she began wondering what it was that Ichiro liked about her. Unable to sit still, she went downstairs to ask him, but he didn't answer when she knocked, so she opened the door slightly. Chihiro happened to walk by at that moment, and when she spoke up, Shiyori nearly jumped out of her skin. The younger girl apologized for startling her and asked if there was something she needed. Shiyori said she needed to talk to Ichiro about something personal, prompting Chihiro to ask if something was going on between them. Shiyori felt a bit awkward answering the question, so Chihiro apologized for prying and told her that Ichiro was in the kitchen. After she walked away, Shiyori walked into the kitchen and found Ichiro asleep on the dining table. Her first instinct was to touch his neck, but she had to physically stop herself because she felt it was an inappropriate thing to do. She then gently called out to Ichiro, and when he woke up, she asked him to go inside and sleep. She also asked if she could touch his neck because it was still calling out to her, and Ichiro told her that she didn't need his permission to touch him. Shiyori liked that, but as a morally driven person, she told him that she preferred consent over everything. Hearing this, Ichiro put his head back on the table, allowing Shiyori to touch his neck to her heart's content. It wasn't until later in the night that she realized that she had forgotten to ask her question. Later that week, Ichiro took the updated draft to his editor, who told him it was his best work yet. Later, when Ichiro returned home, he figured he'd take Shiyori out since he owed his inspiration to her. However, when she walked into the hallway a few seconds later, the dumb idiot started talking about work. Shiyori told him she was ready to lock in, but the look on her face said otherwise, so he asked if something had happened. Shiori explained that she'd applied for 2 assistant jobs that week and had just been rejected by the first one. The second place hadn't even tried to contact her, and she didn't think they would either. Curious, Ichiro asked what had happened, so Shiori explained that things had gone smoothly initially. However, things changed when she mentioned that she'd only been in the manga space for about a year. The guy asked if she was one of those upper-class girls whose parents didn't let her read manga, and Shiori revealed that she was a princess. The guy's shocked reaction made Shiori realize that she shouldn't have mentioned her background. She quickly tried to cover it up by saying she liked to act like a princess most of the time. This lie just made things awkward between them, and Shiori became even more embarrassed. When she finished her story, Ichiro sympathized, saying not every job was a perfect fit, but Shiori didn't think so. She genuinely believed she was the problem and kept talking badly about herself. Hoping to make her feel better, Ichiro reminded her that she was getting Momoka's old tablet soon. He said once that happened, she would learn how to draw digitally, and since she was very dedicated to her craft, he knew she would become a digital artist in no time. Shiori still didn't light up, so as a last resort, Ichiro suggested that they pick something from her to-do list. Before she could respond, Machi and Fumio popped their heads out of a jack-in-the-box and suggested that they get yakiniku instead. Ichiro was surprised that they had been listening, but told them that he didn't think eating meat was on Shiori's list. Shiori answered that it was, so Ichiro had no choice but to give in and take them out for some yakiniku. Macho and Fumio were excited the entire way, and Machi assured Shiori that she would love the place they were going to. Once they arrived, they got a table, and Shiori began taking photos like she always did. This prompted Ichiro to ask if she'd ever had barbecue, and she said she had, just not at a place like that. After taking the last photo, she attempted to flip the meat with her chopsticks, but Machi refused to let her. She explained that the chopsticks were for vegetables and that the tongs were for the meat. She also told Shiori not to flip the meat because the onions would get burned, so Shiori thanked her for teaching her the ways of grilling meat. The young girl grew shy after hearing this, but Shiori told her not to, since she was doing a good job. Eventually, they started eating, and a little while later, they left the restaurant with full bellies. On the way back home, Shiori told Ichiro that she was feeling much better, and thanked him for letting her experience something new. She said that when she was younger, she was allowed to attend cookouts but not to participate, since she was the princess. That made her so reserved that she stopped trying to do things with others. However, since she met him, she'd done all sorts of things that she could only dream of doing in the past. When she said she wasn't going to let little things discourage her, Ichiro told her she inspires him to do better. Not only her, but his siblings too, because watching them enjoy the little things he could provide for them made him glad he had not given up on his dreams. Shiori commended him and said she, too, would keep pushing. But Ichiro warned her not to overdo it. When he kept fumbling over his words, she smiled and told him that she understood what he meant. Later at home, Machi and Fumio were enjoying some popsicles when Shiori walked into the kitchen area. They asked if she wanted some, but she declined, opting for coffee instead, before asking where Ichiro was. Machi said he locked himself away in his room shortly after they got back, and she had no idea what he was doing. Shiori found this strange, and as she poured her coffee, she kept wondering if she'd done or said something to upset Ichiro. She was so lost in thought that she failed to notice that her coffee was running over until Machi called out to her. Meanwhile, Ichiro was in his room, feeling bad that he never knew the right words to tell Shiori, when he suddenly decided to write her a letter. He then spent the rest of the night trying to write down the things he couldn't say. However, he started struggling, so he decided to draw an entire manga instead. When he finished, it was morning, so he went straight to her room to drop it off. Shiori told him she was getting dressed, so he said he'd drop the manuscript in her package box. However, before he could walk away, she opened the door and suddenly apologized for the previous night. Ichiro had no idea what she was talking about, so she invited him in to see what she was working on. At a glance, it looked like a murder board, but then she explained that she was experimenting with new patterns. She also said that she'd read a new manga and had gotten hooked on it almost immediately. Ichiro couldn't help but feel proud of her, but then he remembered the reason he came and started cringing. He thought about leaving, but Shiori suddenly asked to see the manga and took it before he could come up with a reasonable excuse not to hand it over. When she began flipping through it, Ichiro wanted to die from embarrassment. However, that changed when he noticed that Shiori was crying. She assured him that they weren't tears of sadness and explained that she was surprised. Ichiro basically wrote a story about them, with Shiori as the main character, and he highlighted everything he liked about her. By the time she was done reading it, she was full on crying, and Ichiro didn't know what to do. When he tried to take his hand back, she grabbed it and pressed it against her cheek, promising to cherish his story. Later in the day, Ichiro got a call from Sano, the other guy Shiori had applied to work with. Apparently, he knew Ichiro and wanted to warn him that his assistant was in love with him. Ichiro pulled an Uno reverse by revealing that he was dating Shiori. Sano quickly apologized and said he'd love to work with Shiyori again since she wasn't a crazy stalker. Ichiro thanked Sano and promised to let Shiyori know about his offer. At the same time, Shiyori was practicing her line drawing, but she kept stealing glances at Ichiro's gift and smiling like an idiot. A few days later, Shiyori accompanied Ichiro, Machi, Fumio, and Chihiro to the cemetery to see Ichiro's father. After setting up all the items they brought, they offered their respects, and then Ichiro told the man what everyone had been doing. Shiyori simply observed everything with a quiet smile, and when they were done, the group went to have lunch. Ichiro explained to Shiyori that whenever they visited their father, they stopped by that park for a picnic. It wasn't something they had planned, but somehow they always found themselves doing it. As they began eating, the younger ones praised Ichiro's food and started talking about the other dishes he'd made. Chihiro couldn't add her 2 cents since she didn't always tag along for the visits, and when they started teasing her, she became flustered. However, that flusteredness turned to shock the moment Machi suddenly revealed that Ichiro and Shiyori were dating. Ichiro immediately cautioned Machi for having a loud mouth, so the girl asked if she wasn't supposed to tell anyone he was in a relationship. He replied that she could tell, but then gave her some manju buns to prevent her from ad-libbing while he explained things to Chihiro. Chihiro told him that she'd had her suspicions and added that she was glad they were together, which made them happy. Just then, Machi suddenly blurted out that their father had loved manju buns, and Ichiro said it was because he had a sweet tooth. Machi agreed and said their father worked and played so hard that she always wondered if he got any sleep. The only time he wasn't doing any of those things was when he went to see the doctor, and she was glad he didn't have to do that anymore. As soon as she said this, she froze. So Ichiro switched to big brother mode and pulled his siblings to his side. Machi tried to act like she was fine, but Ichiro wouldn't let go, and when her eyes teared up, Shiyori gave her a handkerchief. She then told them that on her island, they remembered the dead by talking and praying for them while stargazing. They had done it when her grandmother died, and even though she didn't cry like her people, she also missed her grandmother. Chihiro told her that gathering under the stars sounded nice, and Shiyori confirmed that it was, adding that her people were always connected. Hearing her refer to the islanders as her people confused Chihiro and Machi, so Shiyori quickly covered it up, saying she meant her family. Eventually, they packed up their things, but just as they were about to leave, Ichiro remembered something, so he asked everyone to return without him. After he rushed off, Machi turned to speak to Shiyori, only to discover that she had disappeared. She showed up a few seconds later beside Ichiro, and he told her that she didn't have to come with him since he wasn't going far. Shiyori said she just wanted to accompany him, so he didn't argue with her again. A little while later, they were at his father's grave, and Ichiro placed a manju bun on it. Curious, Shiyori asked if their father had died from an illness, and Ichiro confirmed it. He said his old man had kept his illness from them so they wouldn't worry, and by the time they found out, it was already too late. Shiyori sympathized with him and then pointed out that when he was updating his father on everyone's life, he failed to talk about himself. Ichiro admitted that he hadn't realized it, so Shiyori put her hands together and spoke on his behalf. When she finished, Ichiro told her that she'd hyped him up a bit too much as he hadn't done anything worth mentioning. Shiyori disagreed, but then noticed his solemn expression and asked if something was bothering him. Ichiro took a while to respond, but he assured her he would be fine and thanked her for being there for him. He then took a deep breath and formally introduced Shiyori to his father as his girlfriend, whom he had wanted to be with for a long time. Shiyori hadn't expected that last part, so she was a bit shocked and only came back to her senses when she suddenly sneezed. Seeing this, Ichiro said it was time they returned home, and Shiyori agreed. That night, as she sat at her desk, the delusional girl couldn't help but imagine Ichiro asking for his family's permission to be with her. However, since she didn't know what his parents looked like, Machi and Fumio played the roles of his parents. When the wedding scene popped up in her head, she became so shy and flustered that her head started feeling woozy. At the same time, Ichiro, who was in the kitchen, realized that his statement at the cemetery was basically a marriage declaration. Just as he began imagining speaking to Shiyori's father, Shiyori walked in, looking all red. He immediately figured she was sick, and once he confirmed it after taking her temperature, he instructed her to go to bed. After she complied, he gave her some water and returned to the kitchen to get her some food and medicine. However, it suddenly dawned on him that normal medicine might not work on her, seeing as she was literally an alien. A little while later, he returned to Shiyori's room with some food and told her to text him if she needed anything else. When he turned to leave, Shiyori grabbed his sleeve and asked him to stay a little bit longer. As a good boyfriend, Ichiro complied, so she began telling him about her room back home. She said it was so big and quiet, but whenever she called for her people, they came to her. However, she couldn't do that in his house since her people weren't there. Ichiro tried to apologize, but she cut him off, saying she preferred her new room to her old one. The old one made her feel alone, but this one gave her a sense of warmth. After she said this, Ichiro noticed she was struggling to speak, so he told her to just rest. Chihiro shyly admitted that she wanted to keep talking to him because she wanted him to stay with her. Ichiro smiled after hearing this and promised her that he wasn't going anywhere. He also held her hand to prove that he wasn't lying, which made Chihiro happy. The next morning, Chihiro woke up feeling better and was shocked to see Ichiro sleeping next to her table. Just as she started freaking out about them spending a platonic night together, Ichiro woke up and was shocked to see her. He hadn't realized that he'd fallen asleep on the floor, so he apologized and tried to leave. However, Chihiro suddenly got out of bed and hugged him. Ichiro remained frozen for a few seconds, then turned and hugged her properly, telling her he was glad she was fine. Just as he let go of her, his siblings opened the door and asked Chihiro if she was feeling better, since Ichiro had told them she was sick the night before. Chihiro thanked them for their concern and assured them that she was feeling better, so they relaxed and turned their attention to Ichiro. They asked what he was doing in Chihoro's room so early, and he claimed that he'd come by to check on her. He then suggested that they help him prepare breakfast and walk them out of the room before they could start asking more questions. Weeks later, it was wintertime, but while others were out enjoying the festivities, Ichiro and Chihiro were holed up in his room completing his manuscript. Shortly after they finished, Ichiro heard the radio presenter talk about Christmas and imagined himself having an intimate Christmas dinner with Chihiro. He then asked if she would return home for the new year, and Chihiro told him that she wouldn't. Relieved, he invited her to visit the shrine with him and his siblings, and she agreed. Just then, his siblings came in and asked what they were talking about, and Ichiro told them that they were making New Year plans. Days later, it was Christmas Eve, so Momoka and Sano were invited to a Christmas party. While they were eating, Chihiro told Ichiro that he would have a future in the culinary industry if he ever decided to quit being a manga artist. Ichiro shyly claimed that his cooking wasn't all that, but Chihiro told him that her taste buds begged to differ. They soon began banting, which prompted Machi to tell them to stop flaunting their love in front of everyone. Momoka couldn't believe her ears, but Ichiro and Chihiro confirmed that they were dating. Chihiro even proudly revealed that she'd confessed first, and Momoka said she wasn't surprised, since Ichiro had always been a spineless wimp. She then backed up her claim by telling Chihiro about the time she scraped her knee when they were younger. Momoka had thought it would be cool to have a scar, but wimpy Ichiro had cried and told her that there was nothing cool about scars. Chihiro found the story adorable and asked Chihiro if she had more stories about Ichiro that she could share with her. Chihiro told her that she'd only moved there recently because of school. However, she could confirm that Ichiro was the kindest person she'd ever met. Ichiro immediately tried to act humble, but Chihiro wasn't listening and asked for more Ichiro lore. Machi spoke up, saying Ichiro always let her and Fumeo go first whenever they ate or took a shower, proving that the guy was the reincarnation of Mother Teresa. Chihiro was just happy to hear that all loved her man, so Sano asked if she wanted to hear his own story. Ichiro immediately told him to shut up, knowing that Sano's stories would only make things worse. Momoka then asked Chihiro to tell them about herself, and Chihiro said she came from an island called Yobishima. Intrigued, Momoka asked for more details, which Chihiro provided until it was time to talk about her fond memories. She didn't think telling everyone that she was a real-life princess was a good idea, so she just became quiet. Momoka interpreted her silence to mean that she didn't like talking about herself, so she apologized for being nosy and handed Chihiro a Christmas present to shake off the awkwardness. She said it was her old tablet, and Chihiro instantly lit up at the thought of using it. Satisfied with her reaction, Momoka handed presents to Machi and Fumeo, making them very happy. A little while later, Sano and Momoka left, and Machi asked Ichiro if they could stay up later. Ichiro pointed out that Fumeo was already sleepy, so Machi became disappointed. However, that changed when Chihiro offered to stay up with her, and somehow they agreed to have a sleepover in Chihiro's room. Ichiro was a bit bummed out by this since he'd wanted to invite Chihiro on a walk, but seeing how happy she was, he decided not to be selfish. Later, after Fumeo was sound asleep, Chihiro and Machi invaded Chihiro's room to begin their sleepover. When Chihiro saw Chihiro's full bookshelf, she asked if she could borrow some of the books later. Chihiro said yes and happily pulled out one of her favorite series to recommend. When she realized that she was geeking out, she apologized, but Chihiro assured her that she didn't mind. Eventually, the sleepover kicked off, and as they chatted, Chihiro told the girls that she had a secret. Ichiro happened to walk up to the door at that moment, so he heard when Chihiro revealed her identity as a princess. Machi and Chihiro didn't say anything, so Chihiro kept talking and said her secret felt like a burden on her relationship. As soon as the words left her mouth, Machi told her that it was okay to keep secrets because everyone had things they weren't ready to share, and Chihiro agreed. They then told her they would keep her secret, but asked whether Ichiro already knew. Chihiro confirmed that he was aware, so Machi told her there was nothing to worry about. Their support made Chihiro happy, and as they celebrated their new bond, Ichiro quietly walked away, wondering what he could do to make Chihiro feel at ease. The next day, while Machi and Fumio were checking their Christmas presents, Shiori walked in and greeted them. Ichiro immediately turned to her, and after bumbling like an idiot, he asked if she would like to go on a date with him after dinner. Machi asked why the dinner wasn't included in the date, and he told her it was because he wanted them to have dinner as a family. With that said, Shiori excitedly accepted his invitation to go on a date. That night, Ichiro and Shiori went on their date, and Shiori was very excited. She took pictures of everything, especially the Christmas tree, because it reminded her of a manga she read. Ichiro told her that the lights on the tree represented the stars in the sky, but he was sure that the stars above her island were prettier. Shiori agreed it was different, but said she preferred looking at the tree's lights because he was with her. Suddenly, her mood changes, and she admits she didn't like that their pact hung between them like a bad omen. Ichiro told her it was fine since he had avoided punishment, but Shiori pointed out that the penalty was still there. If he made another mistake, it would affect him, so she needed to find a way to resolve it. Her words made him realize that she was viewing the problem as something she had to handle alone, so he reminded her that they were a team. He also said he was tired of treating their relationship like a free trial and asked that they start dating with the intent to get married. Shiori's face instantly heated up, but she didn't refuse and even asked if she could kiss him. Shocked by her bold request, Ichiro also grew flustered before shyly agreeing to be kissed, so Shiori pulled him forward. The kiss was brief, but it conveyed her feelings, and when they returned home later, they were blushing like crazy. Shiori couldn't even sleep because she kept replaying the kiss in her head and wondering if Ichiro loved it as much as she did. When she began calculating how long they had kissed for, her phone vibrated with a text from her mother. The following morning, when Ichiro ran into Shiori in the hallway, he was hit with a flashback of their kiss and blushed. However, Shiori looked troubled, and after exchanging greetings, she told him that she'd heard from her people. Ichiro assumed it had something to do with their pact, but she explained that it was just her mom. The woman wasn't happy that she'd been ghosted and wanted to know when she'd be visiting. Shiori said she told her that she wouldn't return home for a while, as she knew it wouldn't be easy for her to leave again. Hoping to cheer her up, Ichiro invited Shiori to prepare for the new year with him, and she agreed. After cleaning the windows and changing the curtains, they went shopping for groceries and New Year ornaments. When they got back home, they made a kotatsu inside Ichiro's room and sat down to watch television with Machi and Fumio. Feeling relaxed, Shiori asked the siblings what plans they had for New Year's, and Machi told her to check out the song Lazy Song by Bruno Mars. However, Ichiro reminded her that they still had to go to the shrine to offer prayers, so that was what they did on New Year's Day. When they finished praying, Machi insisted on going to the lottery stall since Ichiro had tickets saved. Surprisingly, Shiori won the grand prize, family tickets for an overnight stay at a hot spring, which made them excited. The very next day, they arrived at the place and spent time admiring the view of Mount Fuji from their balcony. While they were settling in, Shiori's mother called, but she refused to answer. Machi then mentioned that the place had a family bath, and the alarm bells in Ichiro's head went off. Fortunately for him, Machi said she wasn't interested in bathing with him and invited Shiori to go to the women's bath with her. While they were there, Ichiro sat in the men's bath with Fumio, thinking about Shiori and her birthday suit. When he realized how dirty-minded he had been, he dunked his head in the water to wash away the thoughts. A little while later, all four of them met in the lobby, and Ichiro asked Shiori if anyone had seen her tail. She laughed and told him that she tucked it away before going into the lace, making him wonder just where she tucked it. When Shiori noticed that his face was red and that he was acting weird, she tried to question him, but he kept avoiding her. Eventually, they had dinner, and after Machi and Fumio fell asleep, Shiori joined Ichiro in the footbath. As soon as she sat down, she told him that she wanted to do something with him, and Bro became flustered, thinking he was about to graduate to full adulthood. However, Shiori pulled out her tablet and started showing him everything she'd learned to do with it. Ichiro soon became intrigued, so she allowed him to do a test run and see that he was missing out. When he got tired, he took in the view and thanked Shiori for giving him a special new year. Shiori told him it was her first time celebrating New Year's like that, prompting Ichiro to ask if she was sad that she didn't return home. Shiori admitted she was actually scared to return home because her mother had never agreed to it. She only got to leave thanks to her grandmother's dying wish, and she was afraid that once she returned, her mother would lock her away like a cliché Disney princess. Ichiro felt sad upon hearing this and wished to help her feel better. In response, Shiori leaned into him, and when she pulled away a few moments later, she told him that being with him was more than enough. The next day, Shiori's mother called again, and when she answered, the woman said she was disappointed that Shiori hadn't called once. When Shiori tried to defend herself, she accidentally let it slip that she had a boyfriend, shocking her mother. She then quickly tried to do damage control, but Ichiro snatched the phone away and introduced himself as her boyfriend. Instead of responding, Shiori's mother ended the call, leaving Ichiro feeling like he'd made things worse for Shiori. Surprisingly, Shiori just laughed and said she knew he did it out of love. Machi and Fumio then started cheering them on, so Shiori suggested that they go out and have fun. Their first stop was the lake, and after Ichiro took photos of Shiori, he started worrying about the first impression he'd given Shiori's mother. Just as he was about to begin spiraling, Machi called him over to take photos with them. Meanwhile, on Shiori's island, her mother called a meeting and told everyone that a cultured fiend was deceiving their princess. The people immediately became aggravated and insisted that it was time for Shiori to return home. Her mother assured them that it would be done and announced that she would personally go and get her daughter back. When they started complaining about her safety, her husband opened the door and told them that she wasn't going alone. Back at the lake, Shiori was checking out the souvenir store with Machi and Fumio, but then they walked off to find chocolates. This pushed her to look for Ichiro, and when she found him, he pointed out that her phone was ringing. Shiori said she wasn't going to answer it because she knew it was her mother calling, and this troubled him. He told her that he didn't want to be the reason she fought with her mother, and Shiori assured him that he had done nothing wrong. When he kept blaming himself, she angrily told him that she was proud of him for standing up to her mother. She also said that she didn't like hearing the love of her life speaking badly about himself. Suddenly, Ichiro fell to the floor, as the pact was punishing him for Shiori's sadness. When Shiori started taping his face, he opened his eyes and apologized for making her sad, but she said he wasn't to blame. She then helped him up and angrily stomped to the lounge while complaining about how the pact was dumb. After she handed him a bottle of water, Ichiro started smiling and said she looked hot when she was angry. Shiori scolded him, saying it wasn't the right time for him to joke around, so he apologized and promised to focus. Just then, Machi and Fumio rushed over and asked Ichiro if he was feeling okay. Shiori and Ichiro assured them that everything was fine, and Ichiro even stood up to prove it. Seeing this, they relaxed, and Machi handed Ichiro the matching keychains they had bought. She said it was to thank Shiori for the trip, and Shiori vowed to treasure it forever. Machi and Fumio then left to buy more items, so Shiori told Ichiro that they had to fight to protect their love and those they cared about. She asked if he was prepared to go to her island to annul the pact, and Ichiro took her hand, saying he was. Hours later, they returned home, and Shiori was shocked to find her family waiting for them. Her mother looked as imposing as ever, but her father smiled as he introduced himself to Ichiro and his siblings. When Ichiro introduced himself to them, Miyoka's eyes lowered into slits, while her husband was a bit disappointed. From his wife's explanation earlier, he'd assumed Ichiro was a grade A delinquent, but seeing him now, he wondered if he was really a threat. Ignoring her husband, Shiori's mother tried to get down to business, but Machi suddenly sneezed, drawing everyone's attention to her. Shiori's father then apologized for showing up without proper notice, and his wife agreed to talk the next day. After they left, Shiori apologized to Ichiro and his siblings for the inconvenience, but they assured her that everything was fine. Later, after putting the young ones to bed, Ichiro and Shiori talked. Shiori made it very clear that she wouldn't return home, but admitted that she was worried her mother would do something to Ichiro and his family. Ichiro was convinced that his mother wouldn't stoop so low and asked who she'd asked to look into the pact. Shiori said the lady, Makoto, had come with her parents, and from their behavior, it was obvious that the lady hadn't snitched. She then proposed that they trick her parents into telling them how to annul the pact, and even though he was skeptical, he agreed. Later, as Ichiro lay in bed, he thought about Shiori and hoped that they could smooth things out with her parents. Meanwhile, Shiori was in her room, compiling a list about Ichiro so she could show it to her parents. The next day, Ichiro and Shiori left Machi and Fumio in Chihiro's care before heading to meet Shiori's parents. When they arrived, Shiori noticed that her parents were alone and asked where their servants were. Her father answered that he told them to stay back because it was a family affair, but his wife spoke up, saying Ichiro wasn't family. She then made it clear that she would never accept a lowly outsider to be her daughter's spouse. Annoyed by her mother's statement, Shiori told her mother she was being rude, but the woman replied that she wasn't, prompting a stare-off between mother and daughter. Thankfully, Shiori's father intervened, so they moved to the sitting area of the lounge. Ichiro whispered to Shiori that she should stick to their plan, but she surprised him by telling her parents that she wanted them to read what she'd written about Ichiro. When he tried to convince her not to give them the book, her mother interrupted them, saying she wasn't interested in learning anything about Ichiro. She also mentioned that Ichiro would leave Shiori if he discovered who she really was, and that infuriated Shiori so much that she blurted out that Ichiro already knew the truth. Shocked, Miyako asked how she could have blabbed about her true identity to an outsider, prompting Shiori to reveal that Ichiro had touched her stinger accidentally. Her mother's shock turned to anger, and she accused Ichiro of having relations with her daughter. Shiori and Ichiro swore that it was an accident, but the woman didn't believe them. She said Shiori was the future queen of the Star People, and an outsider like Ichiro wasn't fit to be with her. She then held Shiori's face in her hands, trying to coax her into listening to her, but Shiori told her that she had never once believed in her. The next moment, she ran off, ignoring her mother, who was calling out to her. A little later, Ichiro found her in the nearby park, so she apologized for running off. He handed her jacket to her and said he could relate to her mommy issues, revealing that his mother didn't speak to him. While they were talking, Shiroi's father arrived, looking for them. Concerned, Ichiro asked if it was okay for him to be away from his wife because of their pact, and he assured him that he was fine. He then suggested heading back, as his wife had calmed down a bit. When they got back, Miyako apologized to Shiori for being a judgmental Karen. Shen then asked Ichiro to explain how he got pricked by Shiori's stinger. Ichiro explained it animatedly, but Miyako still refused to accept their relationship. When she declared that they must annul the pact, Ichiro and Shiori didn't even argue, which shocked her. At first, she thought they were joking, but then Shiori confirmed that she wanted the annulment. Miyako quickly did the math in her head and realized that if the annulment happened, Shiori and Ichiro would break up. Her mood instantly lifted after this, glad that Shiori was finally listening to her. Shiori played along but said she would only get the annulment if she were allowed to remain in Tokyo. Of course, Miyako refused, stating that something similar might happen again. Shiori reminded her that it was her grandmother's dying wish, but Miyako said it didn't matter. She asked Shiori what she'd achieved since leaving home, and Shiori couldn't respond. Seeing this, she reminded Shiori that it was thanks to her and her father that Shiori could live comfortably in Tokyo. If they withdrew their support, Shiori wouldn't be able to survive. Ichiro immediately disagreed, arguing that Shiori had spent the past few months proving herself. His defense came with proof, and after seeing what their daughter could do, Shiori's father finally spoke up. He said he would let Shiori stay in Tokyo for a year with a lower allowance. Ichiro and Shiori were happy with his verdict, and when he asked for his wife's opinion, she also gave her approval. However, she made it clear that after a year, she would return to take Shiori back. When it was time for Shiori and Ichiro to leave, her father promised to send over documents on the annulment process when he returned home. Ichiro thanked him for his support, but the man said he wasn't on their side. He was only doing his part to support his wife and nothing else. Speaking of his wife, she suddenly started crying and told Shiori that she was glad that she was safe. She then walked into the hotel with her husband, leaving a relieved Shiori and Ichiro behind. Later that week, Makoto and Keigi dropped by the apartment and informed Ichiro and Shiori that they would be performing the annulment ceremony. Makoto did all the talking because Keigo wasn't feeling well thanks to the boat ride. After they were invited in, Makoto showed Ichiro and Shiori the instrument used to remove the stringer. Surprisingly, it was a pair of tweezers, but Makoto said it had been made from their island's Yobi stone. She also said the ceremony would take place at noon the next day, prompting Ichiro to question its importance. Makoto kindly explained that it was just a formality, adding that they didn't even need to prepare for it. She and Keigo would book the venue and get the clothes they would wear, so all they had to do was show up. After her explanation, she asked Ichiro to let her take his measurement. Ichiro agreed, but before they could proceed, Keigi asked to use the bathroom. The boy looked like he was going to pass out soon, so Shiori offered to take him to her room. Once they were gone, Makoto began taking Ichiro's measurements, so he asked what kind of clothes he was getting. Makoto said it was traditional formal attire, and Ichiro admitted he'd never worn anything like that before. As Makoto continued her task, she told Ichiro more about the ceremony, so he asked if it was Shiori's grandma who came up with it. Makoto answered that she was, explaining that as the first star offspring, Shiori's grandmother had done everything for her people. However, as she grew older, she began to dislike some of the things she had built. Makoto then revealed that she was on their side because she had worked for the former queen. Ichiro thanked her and said he was glad that they were finally going to be free of the pact, so she asked if he loved Shiori. The question made him blush, but before he could answer, Makoto dropped a bomb on him. Apparently, there was a 99% chance that his feelings for Shiori were due to the pact, so he might not feel the same after the ceremony. Meanwhile, in Shiori's room, she put Cage to bed and was about to leave when he called out to her, asking to hear her voice. Shiori told him that they couldn't exchange thoughts off the island, but he said he had a solution, and then pulled out a Yobi stone. Shiori's demeanor changed as soon as she saw it, and just as she was about to link with him and everyone else, she cut the connection. She then told Keigi that she was never going back to the island, and tried to leave, but Keigi stopped her. He said Ichiro's feelings stemmed from the pact, and once it was annulled, he would leave her. Shiori couldn't say anything after this, and even after bidding Makoto and Keigi goodbye later, she continued being gloomy. Ichiro was in a similar mood, so he tried making small talk while preparing some hot chocolate, but they didn't address the real issue. When Ichiro eventually wanted to, he saw his siblings at the door and kept quiet. Machi nervously asked if their guests were gone, and Shiori said they were, but that didn't ease their nerves, as they were worried that Shiori would leave them. Shiori assured them that she wasn't going anywhere, and Ichiro backed her up. He also offered them hot chocolate to ease the tension, and it worked like magic. Later, after Ichiro put Machi and Fumio to bed, he got a call from Momoka. She asked if she could drop off some extra gifts, and Ichiro told her she could. From his tone, she figured he was troubled. So, as a good friend, she offered to watch his siblings whenever he wanted to get away with Shiori. Ichiro accepted the offer, saying that he'd drop them off the next day because he had something to do. Still curious, Momoka asked why he was troubled, and he admitted he was afraid of losing Shiori. Momoka immediately called him a down-bad simp, but then gave him some advice as a veteran lover girl. After getting off the phone, he thought about Shiori and prayed that his feelings for her were genuine. Meanwhile, Shiori had dozed off and was dreaming about her island. She sat on a cliff with Keigi, and he excitedly told her that he wanted to marry her. Shiori said she wasn't a cradle robber, but the boy claimed it didn't matter as long as he got into the selection. Curious, she asked what he liked about her, and he answered that it was her title. This made her wonder if her life would be different if she weren't a princess. Later, she went to search for her grandmother, but didn't find her. Since her books were on display, Shiori picked one out and ended up reading all its volumes. When she finished, she was flustered and told herself that she wanted to experience a love like that. Suddenly, Ichiro grabbed her hands and asked her to be his girlfriend, but before she could respond, she heard Keigi's voice. The scene then shifted to where Keiji was as he told her that Ichiro didn't love her. The next moment, she woke up panting and started worrying again. The next day, when it was time for the ceremony, Keigi came to fetch Shiori and started stuttering like a fool. He also blurted out that he loved her and promised to work hard so he could become her man. Meanwhile, Ichiro was being escorted to the venue by Makoto. When he asked about Shiori's parents, Makoto said they wouldn't attend the ceremony because the queen couldn't leave the island for long. Eventually, they linked up with Shiori and Keigi, and Ichiro noticed that Shiori wasn't happy. When he tried talking to her, Makoto asked them to come in so the ceremony could begin. Once they were seated and Keigi got his camera working, Makoto brought out the ceremonial sake. She said it had been brewed on the island and dedicated to the Yobi stone, so once Ichiro drank it, it would extract the stinger in his body. The realization that they were truly annulling the pact soon hit Ichiro, and he started having second thoughts. However, he still drank the sake, and almost immediately, the stinger emerged from his forehead. This caused him to freak out, but Makoto told him to quit his whining and instructed Shiori to pull the stinger out. Shiori hesitated for a few seconds, and Ichiro tried to use his eyes to plead with her not to do it, but in the end, she pulled out the stinger. Soon after that, Makoto packed everything up and bid the couple farewell, but they didn't respond. They were both too scared about what would happen to them now. But Shiori gathered the courage and, with tears in her eyes, she asked Ichiro if he still loved her. In response, Ichiro hugged her and declared that he still felt the same. Keigi immediately tried to object, but Makoto pulled him away, leaving the lovebirds alone. When evening rolled around, Ichiro and Shiori sat outside together, enjoying the view without talking. Days later, after Maki and Fumio left for school, Ichiro asked Shiori out on a date the next day. Unable to contain her happiness, Shiori said yes and went up to her room to pick an outfit. Unfortunately, all her clothes were funeral chic, so she decided to go shopping. Later, while she was skimming through a rack in a store, Chihiro walked by and saw her, so she went in. Shiori was very pleased to see her and asked if she could help her pick an outfit. Chihiro agreed, so while Shiori changed clothes, she asked Chihiro what kind of clothes Ichiro liked. Chihiro answered that Ichiro wouldn't mind if Shiori wore an old apron, but Shiori insisted that she needed to look good for their date, so Chihiro dragged her to the next store. Later, Ichiro finished the last part of his manuscript, and when he stepped out of the room, he ran into Shiori and Chihiro. When he asked what they were up to, Shiori told him she was shopping because she didn't want to look like a fashion mistake on their date. After they ran upstairs, Ichiro realized he had to put in some effort too, so he told his siblings he was heading to Sano's place. As soon as he got there, he pleaded with Sano to help him. Despite being surprised, Sano gave Ichiro a fashion magazine and asked him to pick what he liked. The next day, Ichiro and Shiori met somewhere for their date and were surprised by each other's outfits. Ichiro told Shiori that she looked nice in color, and she replied that he didn't look too bad himself. Once they were done glazing each other, they began walking to their first destination. However, Shiori kept glancing at Ichiro's hand because she wanted to hold it. When she finally built up the courage, the idiot pulled his hand away, claiming it was sweaty. Soon, they arrived at a skating rink and excitedly got on the ice, even though none of them had skated before. This led them to fall multiple times before Shiori decided to lock in. Ichiro was surprised when she started skating well, and she told him she was just repeating what she'd seen in a manga. She then skated over to him and held out her hand for him to take, but he refused it, saying he didn't want her to get hurt if he fell. He asked her for some time to practice more, so Shiori moved to the side of the rink to observe him. Ichiro fell a few times, but he kept getting back up because he wasn't a quitter. Shiori just watched on, and when she noticed a couple holding hands as they skated, she wished it were her and Ichiro. Just then, Ichiro skated over, so she wiped the tears that had formed in her eyes. Worried, he asked if there was a problem, and she said she wanted to apologize for doubting him before the annulment ceremony. Ichiro told her that he was to blame for that because if he had spoken to her about it, her mind wouldn't have wandered. As they talked some more, Ichiro admitted that he hadn't held her hand because he didn't want to seem too eager. However, he was done pretending and wanted to hold her hand. He held out his hand when he said this, so Shiori took it, and they started skating together. Hours later, they returned home and were welcomed by Maki and Fumio. Machi didn't really say much, and when everyone walked into the kitchen, she lingered at the back for a while. The next day, Ichiro checked his finances and discovered that he'd spent more money than he intended to. Hoping to salvage the situation, he declared to himself that he wouldn't spend too much money for the rest of the month. Unknown to him, his siblings were watching him, and when Machi suggested that they leave Ichiro alone, Fumio rushed to hug him. She quickly followed her little brother and told Ichiro that they were going to play in the park with their friends. Hours later, the bright sky turned cloudy, so the group agreed to go to the nearest house to continue playing. When they asked Machi if she wanted to come, she refused, prompting her friends to ask if everything was okay. It wasn't the first time that she'd turned down an invitation with no reasonable reason, but Machi assured them that everything was fine. Shiori, who was on her way home, happened to overhear the conversation, so she wondered what the problem could be. When Machi and Fumio returned home, Ichiro asked why, and Machi told him it was about to rain. This reminded him that he'd hung the laundry outside, so he rushed outside to remove it after turning down Machi's offer to help. Just then, Shiori returned and asked Machi if everything was alright. Machi realized that she'd heard her conversation with her friends, so she told Shiori not to say anything. Shiori still tried to pry, but the girl grabbed her brother and walked away. A while later, Fumio tried to go to Ichiro, but Machi didn't let him. Instead, she took him to the kitchen to get some juice. At that time, Shiori was in her room, worried sick about Machi, and when she couldn't take it anymore, she came to the kitchen. Machi still insisted that she was fine and just wanted to play with Fumio, but the boy wasn't interested. When he walked over to Shiori, Masi suddenly started crying, drawing Ichiro's attention. Once she'd calmed down a bit, Ichiro began questioning her until she broke down in tears again. The only difference was that she admitted she felt useless because Ichiro had shot down all her requests to assist him. She also said that she felt bad about disturbing him while he worked, which was why she had been turning down her friends' invitations. Heartbroken, Ichiro apologized for everything and told her she could come to him whenever she was worried. Machi promised to do that and then went to make up with Fumio. After she pulled away, Shiori curiously asked what other invites she'd rejected. Machi told her it was just invitations to hang out at her friend's house, but Fumio blurted out that she'd turned down an invite to the summer festival. At this, Ichiro recalled spending the last festival at home, so he promised to take them there once the festival rolled around. Shiori proposed that they throw their own festival and invite Momoka and Sano, and the siblings agreed. Later, she prepared some noodles with Chihiro's help before going outside to set up for the festival. Shortly after that, Sano and Momoka arrived, so they kicked off the festival. While they were eating, one of the tenants returned, so Shiori invited her to join them. Ichiro noticed that she seemed close to the woman, so he asked how that had happened. Shiori told him that they had run into each other in the hallway and bonded over beauty and nail products. Eventually, they gathered to light the fireworks, and Machi thanked Ichiro for being the best big brother. When things started winding down, Ichiro thanked Shiori for making the festival possible. He also thanked her for everything she'd done for him, but she said she had yet to do anything worth mentioning. As they discussed further, she promised to work hard on everything and said she couldn't wait until she was well off so she could propose to him. Flustered, Ichiro tried to face, but his siblings rushed over to congratulate him, and the others joined them. Do you think this love story has a happy ending, or will Shiori's mother try to separate them again? Comment more if you got this far. And also check out the next video.